Realistic is a potentially tariff-soothing deal between Britain and the US, and what might any imposed levies do to our economy in the short term? We were joined by economist Maurice Smith and Erol Morkoc of Republicans Overseas. So Erol, just explain to us briefly why Donald Trump is introducing these tariffs.
Well, these tariffs are part of a broad brush attempt to reintegrate the equal footing of the American labor and the American, let's go with economic future with free trade. And when you have a situation where equality feels like oppression, it becomes clear that things have gone a little bit too far for too long. Donald Trump had made a lot of promises to the domestic American worker. Keep in mind, this was the first time we've ever won the working class vote. And these promises were effectively to bring manufacturing back and to bring back free trade. And right now, we have an unfortunate situation where American businesses can't compete in foreign countries, and foreign businesses do very well in in the United States of America. And so it's our goal here to bring back global free trade. And in this restructuring, where the U.S. is pulling back in some respects and letting other countries take certain spheres of influence, free trade is critical to the promises he made at home and critical to rebalancing the American budget, which is $36 trillion in debt.
Okay, well, Maurice, how in the first instance, how's this going to affect Scotland and the UK more broadly?
Well, I suppose that depends really on what tariffs are imposed tomorrow. I don't think the UK is going to escape much of what the EU and the rest of the world are going to get. It might get a slightly different deal. Britain is currently negotiating or attempting to negotiate a trade deal here. In Scotland's case, it's more that things might be affected on the fringes. So, for example, a big sector for us up here is the food and drink sector, and it could well be that universal tariffs would hit that particularly hard. Does the UK recognise the point that Erol was making there from Donald Trump's perspective? Do they recognise any merit in that? Well, it's interesting. Really, what Donald Trump and his supporters are trying to do, I think, is kind of reverse the trend of the last 40 years, back to Ronald Reagan's day as president, to try and bring manufacturing back, a bit like the UK, the US. Large parts of the US have lost manufacturing industry, mainly to China, but not only to there. And certainly free trade has had its impact. Very, very difficult to achieve, and the difficulty from a political and economic point of view will be how determined are they, and can they actually see this through? Because if it happens the way it seems to be happening tomorrow, it's going to be quite painful indeed for American voters as much as for anyone else. And on that point, Erol, this could hit America first.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation. As I mentioned earlier, we've become the party of the proverbial working class, and many goods that we import from around the world obviously are going to go up in price. But the question is, which goods are the majority of Americans purchasing? So the rich guy who's buying the 16-year Lagavulin, he's okay with a little bit of an increase. You're not going to see the problem there, but you're going to see that on the lower end, perhaps the guy reaching for the Bushmills as opposed to the famous grouse. So you're going to see a situation where also international companies and businesses need to maintain market share, as the U.S. is the biggest consumer. And so the other part of this is that Donald Trump, as a one-term president, has the economic leeway to do this, and his voters are somewhat understanding. Keep in mind, only 1 in 10 Americans owns a significant amount of stocks, and that's where the real bloodbath is going to be in transnational equity holders when these tariffs hit. So on the local situation, I think you're going to be able to hold out a lot more in the United States because it's a consumer-based situation, whereas the people who are selling to us are going to have to deal with pensions, they're going to have to deal with manufacturing, they're going to have to deal with needing to map out quarters ahead of time, and it's going to be a bigger impact to them than it will be to us, at least for the majority of Americans. However, it will certainly not be a no effect, but I think the Americans can outlast pretty much anybody in this game.
Is it sustainable, Maurice?
Well, I don't know whether it's politically sustainable because, as Erol has said, this is a one-term president, presumably, and there's going to be a lot of... I'm not totally convinced the US consumer isn't going to suffer here. Tariffs on Canada and other countries will have an impact on prices in America too. The real effect will be on supply chains. So big companies like Ford and Apple and so on, what Trump wants is for them to start moving manufacturing back into the United States. But at the moment, these supply chains are right across the world.
And very, very briefly, Maurice, should people be concerned as from tomorrow, or might be the possibility of Britain negotiating a deal after the initial big splash? Very briefly.
Well, they may well negotiate a deal. I don't think there's going to be a shock tomorrow. Prices aren't going to shoot up on Friday. But where you see this is where there's reciprocal action by Britain or by the EU, and then the danger that things spiral from there.
Maurice, Erol, thank you both for joining us in Scotland Tonight. And that is Scotland Tonight. Rona will be here tomorrow. Until then, an exhibition showcasing the works of the artist Jack Vetriano, who died last month, has opened in his hometown of Methil. Here's one last thing.
The fact that he